Welcome back, YouTubers. Today we're going to be talking about how the hell you mix your demos. This is part 2. If you haven't seen the first one, go back and rewatch it. That's down below. There's a link, and there's probably a link somewhere else. I haven't decided yet, all right? I'm not clairvoyant. Relax. And so now the next question is, how do we fit this vocal track into this mix? So here's the mix without the vocals. And here's it with the dry vocals. Doesn't sound very good. A lot of this is going to be, you just have to start using your ear. As far as the depth, how much high end, how much low end, the space, the width of the voice, you're going to have to figure out what the track is calling for. And there's no easy answer to that. There's no, cure-all for this. So what I'm going to do is just tell you what I thought about this track. So in this track, I spread all the instruments out to the side for the most part. I kind of kept them on the side. And I want to put those vocals right in the middle, and I want them to be very clear, but I don't want them to sound like they're right next to me. I want them to sound like they're in a performance hall or kind of back a little bit. So I'm going to use reverb to create the depth, and then I'm going to use a lot of effects to kind of create this sort of room feel in it. So what I did is I threw a vocal crunch plugin. This is just a plugin, a grouping that Ableton has, just to give it a little bit of thickness to this. It also has a tube drive in it, which actually gives it distortion. If I maximize that, it would sound like this. It's very common nowadays to add a little bit of distortion to your vocals, especially in pop and dance stuff. I'm going to pull that back, though, a little bit. Now we're going to add in, I've got another, it's just a thread of, or a chain of vocal effects. This is also in Ableton. And I've got a main, I've got a delay, that it's just a simple delay, and I've got a reverb. And these are all running in parallel. In the main chain, I've got a compressor, I've got a gate. Actually, I'm going to probably take that gate off, and then I have an EQ and a tube. So this is kind of giving the fatness of the sound we want. And then the delay is going to add a little bit of sparkle and reflections, and then the reverb is going to give it that depth. So if we just take off the delay and reverb. So the compressor is going to actually make the whole vocal track sort of, it's going to shorten the tops in the lows as far as the dynamics, and it's going to make the whole track, and you can overcompress very easily, but it's going to help the track fit inside the song a little bit better. So as the song gets bigger and smaller, the vocal can go with that without being kind of all over the place. So the compressor kind of tones it down, it harnesses the dynamics of that vocal track. The gate is if we have a lot of breathing and stuff. I'm going to take the gate off. I rarely use gates because I usually have a very clean sound. But they're great sometimes. But sometimes if you leave them on, you'll actually hear the gate cutting in and out. So I usually take them off just to be safe. The EQ, because this vocal was recorded with kind of a bright microphone, I wanted to dampen some of the brightness out, and I also wanted to cut out the lows. And again, cutting out the lows it's all dependent on the song itself. So if we took a lot of it out, it would sound like that. If we added them back in, it would sound like this. So one of the first things I do on any vocal is I cut out a lot of the lows. You don't want to kill the vocal completely. You want to still have the tone of the vocal, but you don't need a lot of lows because it makes the voice sound like it's very forward. If she was just speaking or rapping, I'd probably keep them in, but if she's singing, I don't want it to sound like she's singing right in front of my face. I want her to sound like she's singing kind of in the back of a room or in a concert. Okay, now here's the highs I cut out. Just because that microphone chain that I recorded her in was kind of bright. It was a really bright condenser Rode mic, and I don't want it that bright. Lastly, the tube is just going to fatten it up a little bit. For some reason, when you add a tube, I'm not even sure exactly what it does, but it gives a really nice fat sound, and there's different modes of tube. It's kind of like running it through an amp, like you're running it through an actual tube amp. So I like that sound. It's nice. And then I'm going to throw in some delay. That's quite a bit of delay, but I like it in this song. It sounds cool. If I wanted to pull it down, you can pull it down pretty easily there. And then we're going to add reverb. I'm going to turn that back on. Now it's starting to pull the voice back a little bit, which is sounding better. It sounds like it fits inside the song a lot better. I'm going to actually add a little bit more reverb. And the next thing I did is I actually sent this this track actually to a delay auxiliary. So this is called what we call a throw. And it's taking the vocal, and it's got a long delay on it. It's a full whole note or a quarter note. I'm not even sure what that is. This plugin is always very confusing to me, but it's in time with the song, and it adds it's like a full quarter note of a repeat. But I don't want that to come in all the time. I only want it when she stops singing. So what I do is I put this compressor afterwards. I talked about this in a different video, where you put a compressor afterwards that keeps ducking this throw delay until she's got some space, and then opens it up and gives that throw. So this is I've got the solo, this delay here. You can hear it kind of coming in and out. Okay, now so I'm going to put it all together. I'm going to pull the EQ down just a little bit. And I'm going to actually add a little bit of the timing for the delay, or the reverb. I want just a little more reverb. So an easy way to do that, we just add the delay time on the reverb to be a little bit longer. Just makes her, as some people would call it, she sounds a little bit more, her voice sounds a little bit more wet now instead of dry. Okay, that's kind of how I blend the vocals in on this one. There's a lot of different ways to do this, and so there's some great plugins as well. I often will use Nectar as well instead of just the plugins within Ableton, but we'll do that in a different tutorial. Let's move on. The last thing I want to talk about is how to make your mix, how to make your demo loud. Because you're going to find that when you start recording, if you haven't noticed this already, your mixes are probably going to be a lot quieter than most professional mixes. And that's because it hasn't been mastered. It hasn't been professionally mixed and mastered. And there's a lot that goes into making it as loud as possible. Because this is a digital medium, because this is a digital medium, you have a limited amount of what they call headroom. It means you can only get so loud. And that scale is from negative infinity to 0. And there's a reason for that. I can't remember what that reason is, but somebody look it up and tell me. But the 0 is as loud as you can get. Well, we're going to try to get our whole mix, the nominal volume, to be as loud as we can without ruining the dynamics. And it's a diminishing returns game. The louder you get, the more you start killing the dynamics in the song. And it's a sacrifice. How much are you going to be able to do before you completely ruin it? And how much do you want to just say, hey, I don't want it as loud as this. I want to just sacrifice loudness for better sound and better dynamics. They call this the loudness war. This has been going on for a long time, ever since digital media started coming out. So let's get into this. I'll show you a couple tricks on how I make things louder. So for the sake of an example, I'm going to load up a patch within Ozone, and we're going to just say, this is kind of an EDM type thing, so let's just go with vocal richness, okay? Okay, in Ozone they have what's called a chain. It's like a chain of effects within Ozone. You've got an equalizer here, which gives you a rough and dirty equalizer if you need to do anything. I'm going to actually pull this down a little bit. I don't want to equalize it much. And imagery, this is going to give it some stereo feel and spread things out a little bit more. And dynamics, this is what's called the multi-band compression, probably one of the most important parts of your controlling the dynamics and getting it more and more volume. And lastly, you have a maximizer, which is kind of like a limiter at the very end of it. So in the multi-band compressor, which is the dynamics area, you've got 4 different And actually, you can choose how many you want, but this has 4 different areas in which they're controlling the dynamics. Instead of compressing the entire file, they're compressing just a frequency range, which is pretty slick. So now, and over here I have an input and I have an output over here. So we want to get as much output as we can without clipping. And there I clipped there. So if we wanted to, let's say we really like that volume, but we wanted to control it a little bit more right there. What I could do is I could say, okay, let's hit play. So I'm going over about 1 or 2 dBs here. So let's control our limiter. We're going to grab, it's probably in this zone here, and I'm going to compress a little bit more. I'm going to make my ratio a little hotter. I'm going to give myself a little more headroom in the limiter, and I'm going to do that over here as well. I'm going to put my limiter to be a little hotter and compress a little more, make my ratio a little more. Okay, I'm still hitting it a little bit. Let's pull the compressor down. Let's pull the compressor down in this area. So basically, I'm just compressing these 2 areas a little bit more. And that's going to actually take away from some of the dynamics, but maybe I'm happy with that. Maybe I think that it sounds pretty good still. I'm still getting a little clipping, but I think you get the idea. I could compress a little more. I could make the attack a little faster. I could make the ratio a little higher on the limiter and compressor. Remember, the limiter is just basically, it is a compressor. It's just a really hard compressor. So there we go. I'm getting some, the clipped again just a little bit, but we can do this again. And there you go. It's not clipping anymore. And it's getting up to, ooh, it just clipped there. So anyway, you would just keep doing this until you finally found a balance between a really good sound that's also really loud. And you, again, compare the volume, compare your overall like average volume of your song to what an average volume of a song off a modern CD you like that you compare to. That's one of the biggest ways you get volume. In Ableton, there is multiband compressors. There is a multiband compressor here in the master and limiter area. I'm going to turn off Ozone, and we can drop this here. And it's essentially the same thing. I don't use this very often, so I'm not going to show you how to do it, but that's what you would use if you were using Ableton to do this. If you don't have any of that, and you just want to make your thing louder, if you have just access to a compressor, just grab a compressor off of in your effects rack, whether it's GarageBand or whatever, drop a compressor on here. I'm just going to say generic compressor, okay? I'm going to put my mastering plugin over here, turn off Ozone. Okay, so here's the compressor. It's moving around here, and we're going to use this. We're going to actually drop a limiter after that. A limiter basically just is sort of the ceiling. It's saying, hey, I'll let you compress and move around, but I won't let you get past this spot here. And the limiter is pretty important if you want to... Oh, baby. Oh, baby. So it's hard limiting it right now. It's just pushing it right to the ceiling. But it's not clipping. I was watching my meter over here in the mastering area, and it's not... It's going right up to the edge, but it's not clipping. Baby. Okay. So that's a way you could really boost the volume. You're boosting your input volume into a compressor or limiter or both, and then you're controlling how much compression and how much dynamics are actually getting through into your output before you clip. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions. So that's it for this week. Come back next week. We'll have another tutorial for you. Stay frosty, keep writing, and I'll catch you later. Subscribe below. I'm not really pointing at my crotch.